The scandal erupted on a chilly winter morning, but the first whispers had started months earlier. No one could have predicted how far it would go, how deeply it would cut into the heart of the kingdom. Imagine a palace cloaked in gold and velvet, chandeliers sparkling like frozen fire, and yet behind every gilded door, secrets festered. One of the most shocking, deeply personal secrets anyone had ever seen in the royal world was about to come tumbling into the open. And it all began with Princess Celine. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Celine had always been the picture of perfection. To the outside world, she was flawless, elegant, poised, charitable, admired. Her public appearances drew gasps of awe. Her speeches were quoted in newspapers across the continent. Yet beneath the surface, there were cracks, deep, jagged cracks, hidden from view. And cracks, as everyone knows, have a way of letting the light in. The light can be beautiful, but it can also burn. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to live your life under the microscope of millions? Every glance scrutinized, every whisper amplified? Celine had grown accustomed to it, or so she thought. But there are limits to even the most ironclad composure. And what happens when someone you trusted most decides to shatter the carefully constructed image you've built for decades? That was the question hanging over the palace like a storm cloud, pregnant with threat. The day began like any other, or at least it seemed that way. Servants moved quietly through marble halls, carrying trays of tea and freshly baked pastries. Courtiers exchanged polite greetings, and the gardens sparkled with frost. But in the West Wing, behind heavy velvet curtains, a confrontation was brewing that would ripple through the kingdom like a shockwave. Princess Celine had discovered something. Something personal, something devastating. And the person who held the key to the truth was someone she had trusted more than anyone else in her life. Her father, Lord Harrington. Lord Harrington was a man of contradictions. To the public, he was a retired diplomat, charming, witty, and unassuming. To Celine, he had been her guide, her protector, the one who had shaped her understanding of the world. Yet, as Celine would soon learn, even the closest relationships can harbor shadows. She had always believed she could control her image, her reputation, her narrative. But life and family sometimes have a way of stripping away the illusion. One slip, one betrayal, and everything you've worked for can collapse. It all started with a broadcast. A simple television interview, one that seemed innocuous at first glance. Lord Harrington had agreed to speak on a program about philanthropy, a subject close to his heart. But what he revealed during those 15 minutes was anything but ordinary. Small, seemingly inconsequential details slipped into his words, hints that suggested Celine had carefully hidden something. Something personal, secret, perhaps even scandalous. For a princess whose life had been meticulously curated, every hidden truth threatened to unravel everything. The palace erupted in whispers as soon as the interview aired. Courtiers exchanged nervous glances. Staff members speculated in hushed tones. Journalists smelled blood and circled like predators. And Celine? She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her pulse quickened. Her mind raced. Every word her father had spoken, every insinuation, cut deeper than any blade. How could he? How could someone she trusted completely, someone she loved without question, betray her in such a public and devastating way? But the story didn't end there. It was only the beginning. For Celine had built walls around her secrets, not walls made of stone or steel, but walls of charisma, charm, and absolute control. She had believed that these walls were impenetrable. She had believed that nothing could touch her. But she was wrong. The revelation of her father's words forced her to confront every lie, every omission, every hidden corner of her life. And as she stared into the abyss of exposure, a chilling realization settled over her. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of bringing you down. Have you ever felt the weight of a secret? The kind of secret that grows heavier with every passing day until it threatens to crush you? That's the pressure Celine was under. And it was more than just a personal crisis. It was a public one. The kingdom, the media, the public, all eyes were on her. Every gesture, every smile, every misstep would now be scrutinized. One false move, and the narrative could shift entirely. The stakes were higher than ever, and the rules had changed. In a matter of hours, Celine's carefully controlled world had tilted on its axis, teetering dangerously close to collapse. And yet, Celine was not a woman to be defeated easily. Even in the face of such betrayal, she found a spark of defiance, a glimmer of strategy. She had survived countless political maneuvers, public controversies, and whispers of dissent within the royal court. But this was different. This was intimate. This cut to the core. And Celine knew that if she wanted to survive and thrive, she would need to act quickly, decisively, and cleverly. Every move would need to be calculated, every word carefully chosen. Failure was not an option. Meanwhile, the kingdom buzzed with anticipation. Rumors spread like wildfire. Who knew the full truth? Who could be trusted? Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, speculating on motives, alliances, and betrayals. And as the public hung on every headline, every snippet of information, Celine prepared herself for a confrontation that could change the course of her life forever. But what exactly had her father revealed? And how would she respond? These questions loomed like storm clouds, dark and foreboding, promising a revelation that no one could have predicted. At this moment, the tension was almost unbearable. The walls of the palace, the pristine gardens, the glittering halls, they all seemed to hold their breath. Something monumental was about to unfold. And just when you think you understand the players, the stakes, the motivations, just when you think you know where this story is headed, life has a way of surprising even the most prepared. Celine's next move would not just determine her fate, but shake the foundations of the kingdom itself. Every eye, every mind, every heart would be captivated. And yet, the full truth remained just out of reach, like a shadow behind a velvet curtain. So, what exactly did Celine's father reveal? Why did it matter so profoundly? And what desperate measures would Celine take to protect herself, her reputation, and her legacy? That is where the story truly begins. What followed would be a whirlwind of emotion, strategy, betrayal, and revelation. A story that would grip the imagination of millions and leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and power. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began with a letter, a simple, unassuming envelope that had sat on the edge of a mahogany desk for weeks, almost invisible amid the piles of correspondence, invitations, and royal decrees. But for Princess Celine, this letter was a ticking time bomb. She had known, from the moment it arrived, that its contents could either destroy her carefully curated world or give her the leverage she desperately needed. Yet she hesitated. She had always prided herself on control, but this was different. The weight of possibility, of risk, hung over her like a storm waiting to break. Have you ever stared at something you knew you shouldn't touch, knowing full well that opening it could change your life forever? Celine's hand hovered over the envelope. The seal was intact, wax bearing her family crest, an intricate symbol of lions and crescents that had been part of the Harrington lineage for centuries. It was as if the very history of her family demanded attention, demanded secrecy. Yet the curiosity gnawed at her. Her pulse quickened, her breath caught. She could almost hear the faint ticking of time itself, counting down to a revelation that could not be undone. Finally, with deliberate precision, she broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, creamy, and smelled faintly of jasmine, a subtle touch that suggested care, thoughtfulness, almost mockery. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's. Lord Harrington had always had a flourish to his penmanship, elegant yet bold, commanding yet whimsical. But the words themselves, oh, the words. They were different from the warm, guiding notes of her childhood. These words carried an edge, a subtle accusation wrapped in sentiment. They hinted at truths she had buried, at choices she had made in secret, at things the public had never seen. And with every line, a sense of dread built in her chest, a suffocating pressure that made it difficult to breathe. The letter revealed something seemingly small at first, a minor misstep, a forgotten meeting, an unreported encounter. But these tiny details were pieces of a much larger puzzle. And as Celine read on, the puzzle became clearer. What had been hidden, carefully concealed behind layers of charm, diplomacy, and public smiles, now began to take shape in stark, undeniable relief. Every choice, every private decision, Every clandestine meeting she had hoped to keep buried now threatened to surface. And the implications were staggering, not just for her, but for everyone in the palace, for her closest allies, and for the kingdom itself. Yet the letter also contained hints of opportunity. Celine could almost feel the dual nature of her father's message. Yes, it revealed secrets. Yes, it threatened her carefully maintained reputation. But it also suggested a path forward, a way to reclaim control, to anticipate the moves of those who might wish her harm, to turn the threat into a weapon of her own design. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown in her path, daring her to rise, to fight, to maneuver. And if she failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. If she succeeded, she could emerge stronger, untouchable, a master of her own destiny. The stakes had never been higher. Have you ever felt the tension of standing at a crossroads where every direction seems dangerous, yet one path must be chosen? Celine knew that the wrong choice could not only destroy her, it could unravel the intricate web of alliances, friendships, and power structures that had been built over generations. Courtiers, advisors, foreign dignitaries, and even family members, all eyes would be on her. Every whisper, every glance, every misstep would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially weaponized. Yet in that moment, alone in her chambers, she felt a flicker of something else, exhilaration. Because beneath fear, beneath anxiety, beneath the weight of impending scandal, Celine recognized a rare opportunity to outmaneuver everyone, even her own father. She studied the letter again, line by line, searching for hidden meanings, subtle clues, anything that could give her an edge. And then she saw it. A single phrase, almost overlooked, almost insignificant in isolation, yet packed with implications. Her father had written it carefully, deliberately, knowing she would notice. It was a breadcrumb, a warning, and perhaps even a test. And the realization hit her like a wave. This was not merely about revelation. This was about strategy, manipulation, and legacy. And she was going to have to play the game with everything she had, or risk being swept aside entirely. But the letter was not the only problem. Word of its existence, though not the contents, had already begun to leak. Rumors whispered through the palace like a restless wind, carried by curious aides and eager courtiers. Some claimed the letter contained nothing more than trivial family disputes. Others speculated about hidden accounts, secret marriages, clandestine meetings. Each rumor grew larger with each retelling, each embellishment adding a layer of tension and fear. And the press, the press, would have a field day if even a fraction of the speculation reached the public. Celine realized that the clock was ticking. Action was needed, and the wrong move could spark a firestorm that would consume her entirely. As Celine wrestled with her options, she also had to contend with her own emotions. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from those we love most. Lord Harrington had always been her anchor, her confidant, her guide. And now, he had become the source of the most dangerous threat she had ever faced. Rage mingled with sorrow. Hurt mingled with fear. And yet, beneath it all, a cold, calculating clarity emerged. Celine would not allow herself to be a victim. She would reclaim the narrative. She would turn the tables. And she would do so in a way that no one, not even her father, could anticipate. The first step was understanding the scope of the revelation. Celine reached for her private journal, a meticulously organized record of every social engagement, every financial decision, every encounter that could be deemed relevant. For years, she had maintained this journal as a kind of insurance policy, a way to verify her own actions and keep her public persona immaculate. Now, it would serve a more urgent purpose, to map the battlefield, identify vulnerabilities, and prepare her counterstrike. As she compared the letter to her journal, inconsistencies began to emerge, intentional, perhaps, or accidental, but enough to signal that a larger, more complex game was unfolding. And Celine knew that in a game like this, awareness was everything. The palace itself seemed to sense the tension. The hallways felt colder, the chandeliers dimmer, the air heavier. Servants moved with hushed urgency, staff whispered behind closed doors, and courtiers' eyes darted nervously as they passed one another. Every room seemed charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. And within that charged atmosphere, Celine plotted. Every move had to be precise. Every word, every gesture, every interaction needed to be measured. Because in this world, mistakes are never forgotten, and secrets, once revealed, have a way of multiplying beyond control. Celine's mind raced as she considered her options. Confront her father directly? That would be explosive, unpredictable, and could expose her further. Suppress the information quietly? Risky, because rumors were already circulating. Seek allies within the palace? Potentially dangerous, because trust was a fragile, easily broken commodity. Every choice carried weight, every choice carried risk, and yet indecision was not an option. The game had begun, and she was already several moves behind. But Celine had never been a woman to retreat. She would advance, she would strategize, and she would strike when the moment was perfect. And just as she was about to formulate her plan, the door creaked. A shadow fell across the threshold. Celine looked up. In the doorway stood a figure she had not expected to see, a face she recognized immediately, and one that could either be an ally or an additional complication. The timing was uncanny, almost too perfect. And in that instant, Celine realized that her world was about to become even more complicated. Allies, enemies, secrets, and lies, all would collide in ways that no one could predict. The letter had been only the beginning. The real drama was about to unfold. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The west wing of the palace had always been a place of whispers. Long corridors, high ceilings, and heavy curtains created an echo chamber where even the softest footsteps could carry far. It was here, in these shadowed halls, that the kingdom's deepest secrets seemed to linger, ghosts of whispered deals, clandestine conversations, and alliances forged in secrecy. And now, Princess Celine was walking those halls with a purpose, her mind buzzing with strategy, her heart pounding with anticipation. Have you ever felt the weight of history pressing down on you? Every step Celine took in the West Wing reminded her that she was not just moving through space. She was moving through time, through centuries of decisions, triumphs, and mistakes that had shaped her family's legacy. The portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched her from the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her, judging her, warning her. Some of them had faced crises far greater than hers. Some had survived scandal, some had fallen. And in that silent, oppressive presence, Celine felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She was aware that her own choices, right or wrong, would leave a mark just as indelible. The letter she had read earlier still weighed on her. Every line replayed in her mind, each phrase resonating with implications she could not yet fully comprehend. She had memorized its contents, analyzed its subtleties, and traced its innuendos. But understanding alone would not be enough. She needed leverage. She needed proof. She needed to control the narrative before anyone else could twist it to their advantage. And in the West Wing, among the shadows and echoes, she knew she could find both. A servant appeared quietly in the hallway, bowing low. "Your Highness," he whispered, "Lord Harrington requested to see you in the library." Celine's pulse skipped. The library was an intimate space, lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes, maps, and delicate artifacts. Meetings there were rarely casual. They were reserved for strategy, for confrontation, for revelation. And the fact that her father had summoned her now, in the midst of the storm he had unleashed with the letter, was not a coincidence. It was calculated and possibly dangerous. As she approached the library, Celine's thoughts raced. What did her father truly want? Was this an olive branch, a trap, or an opportunity disguised as confrontation? Could she trust him at all after the letter? And yet, even with these questions swirling in her mind, a spark of defiance flickered. Celine had survived so much already. The intrigues of court, the manipulation of allies, the pressures of public scrutiny. She would survive this. She had to, because retreat was not an option. Not now, not ever. The library doors opened silently, revealing Lord Harrington seated behind an imposing desk. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, but there was a tension in his eyes. A flicker of concern, perhaps, or calculation. "Celine," he said smoothly, "thank you for coming. Please sit." The gesture was polite, formal, yet layered with meaning. Every inch of his demeanor was designed to communicate control, experience, and power. And yet, Beneath it all, Celine detected a tremor, a subtle acknowledgement that the balance of power was shifting. "Father," Celine began, her voice steady, though her mind raced with countless questions. "Why the letter? Why now?" The question was simple, but the subtext was anything but. She needed answers, and she needed them clearly. Every word he had written had consequences, and she could not afford ambiguity. Lord Harrington leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Celine, you've grown," he said. "And that growth brings responsibility, scrutiny, and, inevitably, mistakes. The letter was not meant to harm you. It was meant to awaken you, to remind you that even the most controlled lives contain shadows. There are truths that cannot remain hidden forever." His words were calm, almost philosophical, yet Celine sensed the weight behind them. They were carefully chosen, meant to provoke, to unsettle, and to test. Just as she processed his words, a soft knock echoed from the library door. A messenger appeared, eyes wide, carrying a sealed envelope with an unfamiliar crest. Celine took it cautiously. Her heart raced. The timing was uncanny. Was it coincidence, or part of a larger design? As she broke the seal, she realized the message inside could change everything once again. A revelation that threatened to shift allegiances, expose secrets, and force a confrontation she had not yet prepared for. Her father's gaze was fixed on her, unreadable, calculating. Celine knew that the next decision she made would not only determine her immediate course of action, but also reveal her capacity to maneuver in a world of power, deception, and intrigue. She had faced crises before, but never one so personal, so layered, so immediate. And as she unfolded the letter, her mind raced with possibilities, contingencies, and strategies. Every heartbeat, every breath, every second counted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace had always seemed like a world apart, suspended in time, untouchable, untarnished. Yet now, Princess Celine could feel the threads of its delicate web beginning to fray. Every corridor, every grand ballroom, every gilded staircase was more than just architecture. It was a network of influence, a tangle of loyalties, whispers, and secrets. And at the center of it all was her. She could see it now, clearly, the intricate lattice of power, the subtle alliances, and the invisible lines connecting friend to foe, confidant to betrayer. One misstep, and the entire structure could collapse. Have you ever looked at a situation and realized that everything you thought you understood was only part of a much larger, more complex picture? Celine had that realization now. The letter, the unexpected visitor in the West Wing, the mysterious envelope with the unfamiliar crest. It all suggested a pattern, a design, a larger game being played beyond her comprehension. And yet, even as confusion threatened to overwhelm her, she felt the familiar thrill of strategy awaken within her. Because with knowledge comes power, and with power comes the chance to shape the outcome, rather than merely react to it. Celine moved through the palace corridors with a purpose. Her mind was alive with calculations. Who had access to the information that had begun to leak? Who could be trusted to act discreetly, and who might betray her for personal gain? Courtiers smiled in her presence, but their smiles were masks. Allies whispered behind closed doors, and servants carried messages like echoes of the palace's collective anxiety. Every action, every gesture, every glance mattered. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were immediate, tangible, and dangerous. She reached a small sitting room near the north wing, a room she often used to think, plan, and observe. It was sparsely furnished, with heavy curtains blocking the winter sunlight, and an antique fireplace that had not been lit in decades. Here, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to organize the whirlwind of information swirling in her mind. The letter, her father's cryptic words, the sudden delivery, each was a piece of a puzzle she needed to solve. And as she traced the connections, a frightening realization dawned. The palace itself could be an enemy. Not just the people within it, but the very structure, with its hidden corridors, secret passages, and overhearing eyes, was designed to expose the unwary. Her thoughts turned to allies. There were a few she trusted implicitly, advisors whose loyalty had been tested through decades of court intrigue, friends who had shown courage in moments of crisis. But even trust was a fragile commodity in this environment. One false move, one misplaced word, one misjudged glance could turn an ally into a foe. And then there were the unknowns. Courtiers she had barely met, foreign dignitaries whose intentions were murky, and staff whose loyalty might shift depending on who held the advantage. Each relationship was a thread, and she had to decide which threads to pull, which to sever, and which to weave into her own design. Have you ever played a game where every choice has consequences beyond your immediate understanding? That was Celine's reality now. Every decision, from the smallest conversation to the grandest public appearance, carried weight. And yet, within that pressure, she found clarity. The palace was a living entity, and she needed to become its master, not its prisoner. She needed to anticipate, to maneuver, to act before others had the chance to exploit weakness. And most importantly, she needed to maintain the illusion of calm, the appearance of control, even as the threads of her world threatened to unravel. As she planned, a sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow flitting across the balcony outside the sitting room. Her heart raced. Could it be an intruder, a spy, or merely a trick of the winter sunlight? She moved closer to the window, careful not to reveal her presence, and scanned the courtyard below. A figure was there, pacing, gloved hands clasped behind their back, head bowed. It was someone she recognized, someone she had counted on in the past. Yet even that recognition brought no comfort. The shadow moved with purpose, and Celine instinctively knew that this was no casual visitor. Whatever was coming, it was deliberate, and it was connected to the chaos already unfolding in the palace. She stepped back from the window and allowed herself a brief moment to consider her next move. Every option carried risk, yet inaction was not acceptable. She had learned through experience that hesitation could be fatal in the world she inhabited. The palace was filled with eyes, ears, and whispers, and she could not afford to give even the smallest advantage to those who sought to exploit her vulnerability. Every word, every glance, every gesture had to be precise. And in that calculation, she felt the familiar rush of control, the intoxicating sense that, for the first time, she was not just reacting, she was orchestrating. Her attention returned to the mysterious letter. She unfolded it again, reading the words with meticulous care. There were references she had not noticed before, subtleties in phrasing, hidden implications. Certain lines suggested alliances she had not considered, enemies she had overlooked, and possibilities for leverage she had never imagined. It was as if the letter was a map, a guide, and a warning all at once. And in that moment, Celine realized that the next steps she took could determine not only her own fate, but the fate of everyone in the palace. The game had escalated, and she needed to act decisively. She decided to summon one of her most trusted advisors, a woman named Lady Marisol, whose insight and discretion had been invaluable in past crises. Lady Marisol arrived quickly, her expression alert, professional, yet tinged with curiosity. Celine handed her the letter without preamble. "Read this," she said, "and tell me what you see, without judgment, without bias. I need clarity, and I need strategy. We are on the precipice of something far larger than ourselves." Lady Marisol read slowly, her eyes scanning each line, her fingers tracing the handwriting as if to extract hidden meaning. When she finished, she looked up, meeting Celine's gaze. This is more than a letter," she said quietly. "It's a key. It's a challenge. And it suggests that someone within the palace is maneuvering in ways we cannot yet predict." Her voice was calm, but tinged with concern. Celine felt a thrill of both anxiety and resolve. They were facing a labyrinth, and every step had to be deliberate. The advisor's words only heightened the tension. Celine realized that secrecy, caution, and subtlety would be her most powerful tools. But she also knew that bold action could sometimes achieve what caution could not. It was a delicate balance, one that required intuition, experience, and courage. And as the winter sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace corridors, Celine felt the full weight of her responsibility. The palace was alive, and every movement, every decision, every revelation would ripple outward in unpredictable ways. Suddenly, a muffled sound echoed from the hall outside. A faint shuffle of feet, a whispered conversation, the hint of voices just out of earshot. Celine's pulse quickened. She was not alone. Someone else was moving within the palace, someone whose intentions were, as yet, unknown. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that the threads of intrigue were converging. The web of secrets, alliances, and betrayals was tightening, and she stood at the center of it, both vulnerable and powerful. Celine straightened, her eyes narrowing with determination. The palace was a battlefield, the letter a catalyst, and the shadowy figures within the corridors potential threats or allies. She had a choice: to act, to wait, or to manipulate events from behind a veil of strategy. And she knew that whichever path she chose, the consequences would reverberate far beyond the walls of her chambers. Every whisper, every glance, every word could tip the balance, and the palace was watching. But just as she formulated her plan, the door to the sitting room creaked open. Another figure stepped in, one she had not expected, a messenger with urgent news, bearing a document stamped with royal authority. Celine's heart raced. The timing was uncanny, almost theatrical, as if fate itself were orchestrating the next revelation. And when she unfolded the document, her breath caught. What she read would force her to make decisions that could alter the course of her life, and perhaps the kingdom itself, forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace was alive with whispers that morning. The corridors, usually filled with polite greetings and ceremonial decorum, seemed charged with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Princess Celine could feel it in her bones. The tension, the electricity, the silent undercurrent of fear and curiosity. Ever since the mysterious letter and the cryptic document had arrived, nothing in the palace felt ordinary. Every glance from a courtier, every subtle gesture from a servant, every rustle of silk in a distant hallway carried meaning. The palace was no longer just a home or a seat of power. It was a chessboard, and Celine was moving her pieces with caution, calculation, and resolve. Have you ever sensed that the world around you was shifting, imperceptibly at first, and then suddenly with a force that made the ground feel unsteady beneath your feet? Celine felt that now. Each moment in the past 24 hours had layered tension upon tension, mystery upon mystery. The letter had been only the beginning, the cryptic envelope a signal that unseen forces were maneuvering in the shadows. And as she strode through the ornate halls of the West Wing, she knew instinctively that the next move would define everything. Her destination was the secret council chamber, a room so hidden that only a handful of royal confidants knew of its existence. Carved into the palace's foundation centuries ago, the chamber was shielded from eavesdropping and prying eyes, accessible only through a concealed staircase behind a tapestry depicting the kingdom's founding. It was in this room that the most sensitive matters of state and personal intrigue had always been discussed. And now, it was the perfect place for Celine to gather her allies, assess the situation, and formulate her next strategy. As she descended the narrow, dimly lit staircase, Celine's mind raced. The council chamber was more than a room. It was a symbol of trust, secrecy, and power. Whoever she invited here would be bound not just by loyalty, but by necessity. She had to choose carefully. Allies could become adversaries, confidants could falter under pressure, and even the most steadfast supporters might betray her if the stakes became high enough. Every decision, every conversation, every revelation would carry weight, and potentially consequences that could reverberate far beyond these hidden walls. Inside the chamber, the flickering candlelight cast elongated shadows against stone walls lined with maps, scrolls, and relics of royal history. It smelled faintly of parchment, wax, and dust, the scent of centuries of secrets. Celine took a deep breath, centering herself, and motioned for Lady Marisol to take her place beside her. They were not alone. Others had been summoned as well. Advisors, strategists, and a few loyal courtiers who had proven themselves in previous crises now sat in a semicircle, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The room vibrated with anticipation. "Thank you all for coming," Celine began, her voice calm but authoritative. "You have been summoned here because what is happening now cannot be managed in the open. There are revelations, messages, and movements that threaten the stability of not just my household, but the entire palace. and we must act before these forces, visible and invisible, gain the upper hand. Her words were deliberate, chosen to convey gravity without revealing specifics. In this chamber, subtlety was more powerful than blunt statements. Every listener leaned in, aware that each word could hold keys to survival or advantage. Lady Marisol stepped forward, laying the mysterious document on the central table. Candlelight glinted off the royal seal, emphasizing its importance. "This arrived just moments ago," she said softly, her eyes scanning the group. The content suggests that someone within the palace is orchestrating a series of moves that could destabilize both Princess Celine and the hierarchy. We do not yet know their identity or their full intent, but we must assume their strategy is calculated and far-reaching. A murmur ran through the room, but all eyes remained fixed on the princess, awaiting her instructions. Celine nodded, absorbing every nuance of the council. She understood instinctively that in times like these, leadership was as much about observation as it was about decision. She had to watch, listen, and analyze while projecting confidence and control. Her pulse raced, a mixture of adrenaline, anticipation, and strategic focus. The stakes had never been higher, and she was acutely aware that a single misstep here could undo months of preparation and carefully maintained influence. "First," she said, rising slightly, "we must map the web. Who are the key players? Who could be leveraging this situation for their own advantage? We must identify the lines of communication, the potential leaks, and the hidden alliances. This is our battlefield." She paused, scanning each face for reaction, for hesitation, for insight. "And second, we must prepare contingencies. Every scenario, every possible outcome, must have a response, swift, precise, and decisive." The chamber was silent, the only sound the faint crackling of candles, as each member of the council processed the gravity of the task before them. Have you ever felt the pressure of responsibility in moments where failure was unthinkable? Celine knew that her every choice would reverberate beyond this chamber. The palace, the court, and the kingdom itself depended on her ability to anticipate, adapt, and act. And yet, even with the weight of this knowledge, she felt a sense of exhilaration. Strategy, intellect, and foresight were her strengths, and now they would be tested as never before. Every alliance would be scrutinized, every motive questioned, every action analyzed. The first step, she decided, was surveillance. Not overt, but subtle enough that no one would suspect observation, yet detailed enough to gather intelligence. Courtiers would be monitored, servants discreetly questioned, and communication channels carefully traced. Nothing could be left to chance. Every whisper, every glance, every seemingly trivial interaction could hold vital clues. The palace itself, with its hidden corridors, private chambers, and concealed passageways, became both a tool and a trap. And Celine knew that mastery over this labyrinth could make the difference between control and chaos. As the council discussed tactics, Celine's thoughts turned to Lord Harrington. Her father's cryptic message, his presence in the West Wing, and his role in the unfolding events remained a constant question. Was he an ally playing a long game, a manipulator testing her resolve, or a catalyst for chaos? She could not afford to underestimate him, yet she also knew that underestimating herself would be equally dangerous. Every decision had to balance caution with audacity, observation with action. Suddenly, a subtle noise echoed from behind a tapestry. A faint rustle, almost imperceptible. Every council member stiffened. Celine's pulse quickened. Someone was listening, someone moving through the hidden corridors, someone intruding into their carefully controlled space. She gestured to Lady Marisol, who nodded, her hand reaching for a concealed bell to summon discreet assistance. The chamber was alert, tense, ready for any eventuality. Every second felt elongated, as if the palace itself had slowed time, forcing every decision into sharp, immediate focus. The rustle grew closer. Celine's mind raced through possibilities, a messenger delivering urgent news, a spy seeking intelligence, or an enemy moving to manipulate events firsthand. She had prepared for confrontation, but even preparation could not eliminate the shock of surprise. And as the shadow emerged from behind the tapestry, the council collectively held its breath. The figure paused, head bowed slightly, and then revealed a small, sealed envelope, the hallmark of a clandestine delivery. Celine took it carefully, her fingers brushing the seal, sensing the weight of anticipation pressing down. The envelope contained information that would alter the trajectory of the palace intrigue, a revelation, a hidden truth, or perhaps a new threat. And in that moment, Celine realized that the web she had been mapping, the alliances she had been assessing, and the strategies she had been formulating were all about to be tested in ways she could not yet predict. The palace was no longer merely a place of observation. It had become a battlefield where intellect, loyalty, and courage would determine the outcome. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The grand ballroom of the palace, usually a place of celebration and spectacle, had never felt so tense. Its crystal chandeliers glittered in the dim morning light, yet their brilliance seemed hollow against the undercurrent of suspicion. Princess Celine stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, observing the courtiers below. Every smile, every bow, every carefully measured word was a potential signal, a breadcrumb leading toward truth or betrayal. The palace, she realized, was more than stone and gold. It was alive with motives, secrets, and strategies. And in this charged environment, Celine had to be sharper than ever. Have you ever walked into a room knowing that everyone present had hidden agendas, and that a single misstep could unravel everything? Celine felt that pressure now, every heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of silent observation. The courtiers moved like pieces on a chessboard, yet she was the only one fully aware of the rules, the traps, and the stakes. Every whispered conversation, every fleeting glance, every seemingly trivial gesture was a potential clue, and she intended to interpret each one with precision. Among the crowd, she noticed subtle anomalies, an exchange of glances between advisors that didn't quite match the official story, a servant hesitating before delivering a message, a foreign diplomat lingering too long near a sensitive area. Each observation added layers to the intricate web she was untangling. Celine had always possessed a keen eye for detail, a mind adept at pattern recognition. But even she recognized that this was no ordinary game. This was a complex tapestry of human behavior, ambition, and hidden intent, and the consequences of miscalculation could be catastrophic. She descended the staircase slowly, every step deliberate, maintaining the poise and authority expected of a princess. As she reached the ballroom floor, she greeted the courtiers with measured charm, concealing her inner calculations behind a mask of grace. Some bowed deeply, others merely inclined their heads, but Celine noted every reaction, storing each detail for later analysis. She could feel the currents of loyalty and suspicion swirling around her, invisible but potent, shaping the interactions in subtle ways. A soft rustle from behind a column drew her attention. Celine's instincts sharpened instantly. The movement was minor, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a weight of intention. She approached the column, her posture calm, her gaze sharp, and saw a young courtier, wide-eyed and hesitant. The courtier handed her a folded note, discreet and unsigned. Celine unfolded it carefully. The message was brief, cryptic, and chilling. Trust no one. They watch even the walls. Her pulse quickened. Someone within the palace was actively manipulating events, and their reach extended beyond what she had anticipated. The message confirmed her suspicions. The intrigue was not limited to rumors, whispers, or letters. It was an orchestrated effort by someone with intimate knowledge of the palace's operations. Every movement she made would now be scrutinized, every strategy anticipated. Celine's mind raced, weighing options, anticipating reactions, and considering contingencies. The courtiers continued their routines, unaware of the tension coiling in the room. Celine observed them carefully, noting alliances, rivalries, and subtle shifts in demeanor. Even minor interactions, an exchange of compliments, a whispered joke, a fleeting touch, could indicate deeper intentions. And as she cataloged these observations, she realized that the web of influence extended far wider than she had imagined. Allies could be enemies, confidants could be manipulators, and the shadow of betrayal could emerge from the most unexpected places. Have you ever considered that even the familiar can hide danger? Celine reflected on her trusted advisors, questioning assumptions she had never doubted before. Who could truly be relied upon when the stakes were so high? Who might seize an opportunity to advance their position at her expense? And who, she wondered with a shiver, might be complicit in the orchestrated chaos that had begun to unfold? Each thought added urgency to her need for strategy, for preemption, for control. The tension reached a peak when she noticed two courtiers, previously known for their cordial interactions, engaging in a private conversation near the far end of the ballroom. Their body language suggested secrecy, their voices muffled but intense. Celine approached them casually, blending into the periphery while observing every detail. The discussion seemed to revolve around recent events, the letter, the unexpected envelope, and whispers of palace intrigue. She could not hear the exact words, but the subtext was unmistakable. Alliances were shifting, plans were being devised, and someone's loyalty was in question. Celine retreated to a discreet corner, her mind racing with interpretations. The palace was alive with maneuvering, and she had to act not only to understand the moves, but also to anticipate the consequences. Every whisper, every glance, every cryptic message carried potential implications for her strategy. She had to stay ahead, not merely react. And yet, even as she planned, she felt the creeping anxiety of uncertainty. The game had expanded beyond her initial calculations, introducing variables she had not yet accounted for. Her attention shifted suddenly to the central dais of the ballroom, where a senior advisor had begun to address the gathered courtiers. The advisor's tone was carefully neutral, but the content hinted at changes in palace protocol, subtle adjustments in roles, and a veiled warning regarding loyalty and discretion. Every word, every inflection, was loaded with meaning, and Celine recognized the precision of manipulation. Someone had orchestrated this address to influence perceptions, test allegiances, and perhaps even provoke reactions. The palace, she realized, was not merely a stage. It was an instrument of power, capable of shaping behavior through subtle cues and controlled exposure. As the advisor concluded and the courtiers dispersed, Celine seized a moment to approach Lady Markle, who had remained close by, observing silently. "We must map every interaction," Celine said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension. "Every smile, every hesitation, every subtle gesture. The web is wider than I anticipated, and our opponents are both patient and cunning. They will not reveal themselves easily, but they will leave traces. We must be meticulous." Lady Markle nodded, her expression grave. "Understood, Your Highness. Every detail, every nuance will be documented. We will anticipate their moves, and we will maintain control." The reassurance offered a brief measure of comfort, yet Celine knew that control would be fleeting, constantly challenged by forces she could not yet fully measure. The palace was a living entity, capable of surprises, manipulations, and betrayals beyond even her imagination. As they continued their quiet strategizing, a sudden commotion near the main entrance drew Celine's attention. Courtiers gasped, servants whispered urgently, and the tension in the ballroom ratcheted higher. A visitor had arrived, a figure of significance, cloaked and mysterious, whose presence was unexpected and whose intentions were unknown. Celine felt a chill. The arrival could signal an ally, a messenger, or a new adversary entering the already volatile palace landscape. Every instinct told her to prepare, to anticipate, to respond with precision. The palace was no longer just a backdrop. It was a battlefield, and each moment carried potential for revelation, betrayal, and strategy. Celine's pulse quickened, her mind calculating possible scenarios, contingencies, and opportunities. She knew that the next move, by her or the mysterious visitor, could alter the trajectory of events in ways no one could predict. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The grand doors of the palace's main hall creaked open, and the visitor stepped inside. Cloaked in dark velvet, the figure moved with a quiet confidence, each step deliberate and measured. The courtiers immediately noticed the intrusion, their murmurs swelling into an undercurrent of tension. Eyes darted, whispers rippled, and the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Princess Celine, standing near the staircase, felt a jolt of recognition. not of the person's face, which remained partially hidden beneath a hood, but of the energy, the presence, the unmistakable weight of someone who carried secrets. Have you ever sensed that a single person entering a room could shift the entire atmosphere, that their mere presence could change the rules of engagement? Celine felt it now. The palace, usually a sanctuary of elegance and routine, had become a stage, and this visitor had just stepped onto it with a subtle but undeniable authority. Her pulse quickened, her senses sharpened, and every instinct she had honed over years of palace life told her that nothing about this encounter would be ordinary. The courtiers, hesitant and unsure, parted instinctively, creating a path toward Celine. Even the most seasoned advisors glanced nervously at one another, sensing that the next few moments would be decisive. And yet, despite the growing tension, the visitors' movements remained calm, measured, almost theatrical. Each gesture suggested confidence, mastery, and knowledge that could be dangerous if wielded against her, but invaluable if aligned with her cause. Celine descended the staircase slowly, maintaining her composed, regal demeanor. She did not yet know the visitor's purpose, but she understood the delicate balance of power in play. One wrong move, one misjudged word, could expose her vulnerabilities. The palace had eyes everywhere, and she had to act with precision, projecting authority while remaining alert to every subtle cue, every flicker of expression, every shift in posture. "Princess Celine," the visitor said finally, the voice low, smooth, and authoritative. "We need to speak in private." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. There was no introduction, no preamble, just an implicit understanding that what was to follow was urgent, confidential, and potentially transformative. Celine's mind raced with possibilities: an ally offering intelligence, a threat cloaked as diplomacy, or perhaps a key piece of information that would clarify the chaos already unfolding in the palace. "Very well," she replied, her tone calm, commanding. "The West Wing Library. Now." The decision was immediate, deliberate. She could not afford hesitation. The library, with its secluded alcoves and fortified doors, provided both security and privacy. Every step toward it felt like moving deeper into a labyrinth of intrigue, a maze where strategy, observation, and instinct would determine outcomes. As they walked through the palace corridors, the visitor remained silent, hands clasped behind their back, eyes scanning the surroundings with subtle precision. The silence was tense, punctuated only by the faint echo of footsteps on marble. Celine's mind worked at full speed, processing every possible scenario, weighing the visitor's motives, and anticipating what revelations might await her. The stakes were immense, and the margin for error was razor-thin. Upon reaching the library, Celine gestured for the visitor to take a seat at the long mahogany table. Candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across shelves lined with centuries of books, documents, and royal artifacts. The atmosphere was charged, heavy with anticipation, as if the very walls themselves sensed the importance of the forthcoming conversation. Celine sat opposite the visitor, her posture composed, her gaze steady, her mind alert. "I assume your visit is not casual," she said. "Speak plainly. What brings you here?" Her words were measured, firm, yet laced with curiosity. In the palace, candor was often a weapon, and Celine needed to gauge the visitor's intentions before revealing even a fraction of her own strategy. The visitor leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are at the center of a storm, princess. Forces within the palace are not what they seem. Some are loyal, some are ambitious, and some are actively working to manipulate events to their advantage. I have information that may be crucial to maintaining control. But it comes at a cost." The statement was direct, almost ominous. Celine's pulse quickened. She sensed immediately that the visitor's knowledge could shift the balance of power, but the cost could be steep, exacting, and unpredictable. "Information at a cost is nothing new," Celine replied, her tone calm but pointed. "Tell me what you know, and I will judge its value. But know this: any attempt to deceive me will be met with swift consequences." Her gaze was unwavering, her posture radiating authority. She understood instinctively that control in the palace was maintained not through fear alone, but through the perception of mastery and unshakable confidence. The visitor produced a small folder, carefully sealed and marked with a crest unfamiliar to Celine. They slid it across the table. Inside, they said, are details of alliances, hidden correspondences, and plans that you were not meant to see. It is incomplete, but it is enough to reveal the scope of the palace web and the movements of those who seek to destabilize you. Consider it a map, a guide, and a warning. Celine opened the folder with deliberate care, scanning its contents. Every page, every note, every coded message painted a picture of a palace alive with intrigue, manipulation, and hidden ambitions. Her mind raced. Some of the information confirmed suspicions she had long harbored. Other revelations were shocking, exposing allies she had trusted and enemies she had underestimated. Each discovery carried implications for her strategy, her control, and her safety. And yet, beneath the shock, a spark of exhilaration ignited within her, a recognition that knowledge was power, and that with it, she could reclaim control and navigate the labyrinthine palace dynamics with precision. The visitor's voice cut through her thoughts. This is only the beginning, princess. There are more pieces to uncover, more forces at play than you realize. And some of those pieces are closer than you think. Celine felt a chill. The warning was clear. The palace was alive with hidden movements, unseen alliances, and secrets waiting to surface. Every decision, every interaction, every alliance could carry unforeseen consequences. She looked up from the folder, meeting the visitor's gaze. And why come to me now? Why not remain in the shadows? Her question was strategic. She needed to understand motive before acting. The answer would determine whether this visitor was an ally, a manipulator, or a threat. The visitor leaned back slightly, expression inscrutable. Because time is short, princess, and because some of the moves already in motion cannot be reversed. You must act quickly, decisively, and with precision. Otherwise, the palace may slip beyond your control before you even realize it. Celine's pulse quickened. Every word confirmed the gravity of her situation. She was not merely navigating court etiquette, protocol, or diplomacy. She was facing a dynamic battlefield where every element could shift without warning. And yet, even with the pressure mounting, she felt the familiar thrill of strategy, the intoxicating sense of potential mastery. She could not allow fear to paralyze her. Control had to be asserted, decisiveness had to be demonstrated, and the initiative had to remain hers. The visitor stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Consider this the first step, they said, voice low, deliberate. There are more revelations to come, and some of them may shake you to your core. Be prepared. With that, they slipped out of the library as silently as they had arrived, leaving Celine alone with the folder, the flickering candlelight, and the weight of new knowledge pressing down upon her. Celine sat back, exhaling slowly, mind racing. The palace had revealed a layer she had not fully understood, a layer of manipulation, hidden alliances, and threats that could not be anticipated without vigilance, cunning, and audacity. Every subsequent decision would be critical. Every action, every word, every glance would carry significance beyond measure. And as she processed the implications, she understood with crystal clarity. The next move she made could change the trajectory of her reign, her legacy, and the very future of the palace itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace had grown quieter in the late afternoon, but silence in this place was never ordinary. It was a silence filled with hidden currents, suppressed whispers, and unspoken intentions. Princess Celine moved through the shadowed corridors with purpose, her footsteps muffled against the thick Persian rugs. Every corner, every alcove, every carved doorway seemed to conceal a secret, an overheard conversation, a misdirected glance, a hidden message. The palace was alive with the echoes of intrigue, and she could feel them brushing against her, testing her attention, her perception, and her instincts. Have you ever walked through a place knowing that every movement around you carries significance, that even the smallest action can ripple outward with consequences you may never fully grasp? Celine felt that weight pressing against her like a tangible force. The visitor from the West Wing Library had left a trail of questions, a folder filled with revelations, and a warning that the palace was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Now, each step through these whispering halls demanded vigilance, calculation, and courage. Her thoughts returned to the folder, which she had hidden securely in her chambers. The information it contained was invaluable, exposing alliances, secret correspondences, and subtle manipulations. Yet, even as she pondered its contents, she understood that possessing the knowledge alone was not enough. Strategy, foresight, and decisive action were required to leverage it effectively. The palace was a living entity of power, and she had to navigate its currents with precision, or risk being swept aside entirely. As she walked, a faint rustling drew her attention. Celine froze, listening carefully. The sound came again, soft, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate. Someone was moving in the shadows, observing, perhaps following. Her pulse quickened. In a palace filled with secrets, even a small misstep could have catastrophic consequences. She adjusted her pace, moving toward a more populated corridor where the risk of ambush was lower, yet maintaining vigilance for anyone attempting to intercept or manipulate her movements. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of polished marble, gilded arches, and tapestries depicting the kingdom's storied history. Each tapestry, each portrait, each relic was a reminder of legacy, of duty, and of the stakes that accompanied her position. And yet, beneath that weight, a spark of exhilaration flickered. Celine had always thrived under pressure, finding clarity in chaos. And now she sensed that the palace itself was testing her, pushing her to adapt, anticipate, and assert control. She paused near a hallway lined with statues of former monarchs, each figure carved with meticulous detail. Their stoic expressions seemed to watch her, silently judging, silently observing. Celine could almost hear their unspoken questions. Would she rise to the challenge? Would she navigate the labyrinth of power with intelligence and cunning? Would she survive the currents of manipulation swirling around her? The questions reverberated in her mind, sharpening her focus, heightening her awareness, and solidifying her determination. Suddenly, a soft whisper reached her ears, a voice, urgent yet muffled, coming from behind a nearby door slightly ajar. Celine approached cautiously, hand on the doorknob, and listened intently. The words were fragmented, cryptic, but unmistakable in meaning. The alliances, shifting, danger, now. The speaker paused, then continued in a hurried tone. Must act before it's too late. She cannot know. The letters. Celine's mind raced. The whispered fragments confirmed that the palace intrigue extended beyond what she had already discovered. Allies could be enemies, confidants could be manipulators, and every revelation was part of a larger, orchestrated plan. Every moment was a test, every decision a potential turning point. She had to act decisively, yet with caution, balancing assertiveness with subtlety, strategy with intuition.